Greetings, friends at Christ Lutheran Church. This is Pastor Craig Johnson with our midweek message. Today is Wednesday, the 10th of February, and we're approaching Transfiguration Sunday, this February 14th. Transfiguration Sunday falls on St. Valentine's Day, which this year, Valentine's Day is going to be very strange, isn't it? All of the typical ways in which we celebrate often get a little, going out to dinner doesn't become a possibility, but use this as an opportunity to remind those you love that you love them. Another thing to remember on Valentine's Day, I guess, is those who have been important to us as guides and mentors in our lives. One of the reasons that we celebrate in the church people who are saints like St. Valentine or others is they are examples of in the faith to us, of folks that we can learn from, who can mentor us by studying their lives and find the ways they were able to follow God's call gratefully and gracefully and with power and purpose. Hopefully you've had great mentors. This Sunday is one of the readings. I'm not going to preach on this one so much, but it's the story of Elijah and Elisha. Elijah features in our gospel reading from St. Mark, where Elijah appears on the Mount of Transfiguration. But in the Old Testament, Elijah is a powerful prophet of God who goes through all kinds of experiences, challenging people in authority and being an example of power and purpose on God's behalf, and on behalf of God's people. One of the great relationships in that reading from 2 Kings that we'll have Sunday is the relationship between Elijah and Elisha. Elijah becomes a mentor, a way to help the younger prophet Elisha learn what it means to be God's messenger. And they do many great things together. But this is the reading from 2 Kings where Elisha knows that Elijah is getting ready to return to God and ultimately on the chariots of fire, where he is taken up in the whirlwind. And there's some grieving that goes on as Elisha knows that Elijah will not always be there for him, and probably some looking back over all of the ways in which he has sought to emulate his great mentor. So one of the questions I have for us as a devotion this week is, maybe I'll invite you to go to 2 Kings, the second chapter, and look up that story of Elijah and Elisha together. But to ask a question, who has been a mentor in the faith to you? Who has been someone who, by their example or by their willingness to kind of take you under their wing, has been a mentor in the faith? Maybe it was a family member, maybe it was a grandparent or an aunt who was faithful in their reading of devotions or in seeking to interpret the world through God's justice. Maybe it was someone who, by acts of mercy and kindness and charity, just kind of showed you and invited you to come along. Or maybe it was someone who more formally trained you. Maybe you've been part of a committee or a team at church, and someone who said, I'm going to make sure that you understand the way the altar guild works, or the way that what it means to be an usher, or who physically showed you how to do some of these things. Who said, I would love for you to be a part of the giving tree, and let me show you what that means to be. So often, people who become mentors to us, we don't even know at the time. We think of them as maybe older, eccentric people when we're children or youths, as it will, and can't imagine ourselves learning anything from these old-fashioned people, but are surprised that what's solid and central about their lives of faith kind of rubs off on us, and we see ourselves seeking to emulate that. One of the things that Elisha asks from Elijah is for a share of his spirit, a way in which we can have some of that which is good about those we seek to emulate come off on us. And Elijah isn't always exactly clear on exactly how much of Elijah's spirit comes off onto Elisha, but we know that Elisha goes on to do powerful things in God's name, and it happens either by emulating him or by God's Spirit being poured into him. We're grateful for that. God does not call us to be disciples in a vacuum. Often we are partnered with other people to learn from them and sometimes to have the gifts that God has endowed us with to be named by others too, to see those gifts that we have. Most of us who go on to become pastors, but not just pastors, but volunteers and leaders in the church, usually had someone name a gift within us who said, you do that particularly well, or there's something about your enthusiasm for this project or your passion for this neighborhood or whatever those things are. God does not call us in isolation, but often gives us mentors. And when we start to think about the disciples, we realize that the disciples didn't simply order a set of Jesus DVDs and watch them, or hear other people simply talk about the important thing others were doing. The disciples followed Jesus to all kinds of places, often walking the paths that Elisha and Elijah had trod, or Moses had walked, or other great people of salvation history. And they walked it, though, with their mentor, with Jesus, who was preaching and proclaiming the gospel and letting his light shine and reflect on those disciples as well. So think about who has been a mentor for you. Maybe even you didn't realize in almost a sneaky way that they were mentors at all, but it wasn't until you had completed time in their presence that you realized this. I'm thinking back to the movie Empire Strikes Back in the Star Wars trilogy, the original show back in 1980, where Luke is told that he needs to go out and seek out this guy named Yoda, so that he can learn from him and be trained in the ways of the Force that he's discovered he's got through his father. And he goes to this strange planet in the Dagobah system, and he comes across someone who he hopes will help him find Yoda, kind of a strange creature who lives in a small hut, who talks in strange phrases and seems silly and goofy, and maybe someone not to be taken seriously. But if he can just get the information from this creature about where Yoda is, he eventually will be able to go on and complete his quest. Only it's in the conversation and in seeing this person who seems silly turning into someone who he realizes is himself the one he has been seeking. So sometimes God's mentorship works like that too. We end up being partnered with others for reasons of practicality or other reasons, and we end up finding in this person in surprising ways a depth of faith or of conviction, or some way in which they end up sometimes surprisingly mentoring us. So who mentors you in the faith? Who is your Elijah to your Elisha? Who has surprised you? I want you to think about that question this week as you ways in which the revealing of God's work and God's kingdom is going on. And maybe even someone who themselves has been transfigured before you. You've noticed something in them that only time and the Holy Spirit revealed as a true blessing and a gift to the church. So I invite you during this devotion to be thinking about that. This week, communion is this Sunday. So on the 14th, we invite you to bring elements as you come to our YouTube worship so that you can celebrate the Eucharist with us and the joy of Christ present in, with, and under the bread and the wine, or the grape juice as you need to bring them. So I look forward to celebrating Holy Communion with you all and getting a foretaste of the feast to come. God's blessing this week. Keep all the saints in your prayers. Especially pray for those who are working in vaccination clinics, volunteers, as we seek as a nation and as a community to find health restored and health protected for those who are the most vulnerable among us. Blessing and God's peace to you this week. Be safe, be well, and we'll see you soon.